Hey, stop what you're doing right now, because what I'm about to share with you could be the 4 most important minutes of health information you'll hear this year. And I say that not to be dramatic, but because most doctors, including many oncologists, are still not telling their patients over 50 about this. Not because they don't know, but because they don't have the time in a 7-minute appointment to explain what I'm going to explain to you today in full. My name is Dr. James, and I've spent over 23 years as a clinical oncologist. I have sat across from thousands of patients. I have held hands in rooms where no one wanted to be. I have delivered news that changed lives in an instant. And after all of that, after all those years, I can tell you with absolute certainty that the conversation I wished I could have had with most of my patients happened too late. Not because the science wasn't there. The science was there. It just never made it out of the journals and into the living rooms where it actually mattered. So today, I'm changing that. Right here, right now. And I want you to stay with me for the next 20 minutes because what I'm about to walk you through isn't a sales pitch. It isn't a miracle cure. It's something far more powerful than that. It's a biological truth about your body that the medical system, frankly, isn't built to communicate, but you deserve to hear it, every single word of it. Let me start with something that stopped me cold about 6 years ago. I was reviewing data from a long-term study out of Johns Hopkins, a study tracking over 40,000 adults for more than a decade, and the researchers found something that, honestly, should have made front-page news everywhere. They found that a specific daily behavior, something completely free, something anyone can do, something that takes less than 30 minutes, was associated with a 41% reduction in the risk of developing the most common cancers after the age of 50. Colorectal cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, lung cancer, and non-smokers, 41%. That's not a rounding error. That's not a statistical fluke. That is a clinically significant, repeatedly confirmed, biologically explained reduction in cancer risk. And yet, when I walked into my clinic the following Monday morning and asked 10 of my colleagues, 10 trained, experienced, brilliant physicians, if they were routinely discussing this with their patients, do you know how many said yes? 2. Just 2 out of 10. The others said they agreed it was important, but there was always something more urgent to address. There was always a scan to review, a prescription to adjust, a referral to write, a crisis to manage. And I understood that. I lived that every single day. But I also knew, standing in that hallway, that something had to change. Because here is the uncomfortable reality of modern medicine that most doctors won't say out loud. Our system is extraordinarily good at treating disease once it exists. We have tools today that would have seemed like science fiction 30 years ago. The surgeries we can perform, the targeted therapies we can deliver, the precision with which we can attack a tumor. It is genuinely remarkable. But we are, as a system, not nearly as good at prevention. We are not built for it. We are not incentivized for it. And the people who pay the price for that gap are patients. Ordinary people who did everything they were told, went to their checkups, took their medications, and still ended up sitting across from someone like me, hearing words they never wanted to hear. I got into oncology because I wanted to fight cancer. But the longer I've been in this field, the more I've come to believe that the most important fight isn't in the treatment room. It's in the 20 years before anyone ever needs a treatment room. And that's what today is about. That is why I'm here talking to you right now. So what is this habit? I'll tell you, and I promise, it's not what most people expect. But first, I need to give you the biological context, because without understanding why this works, it becomes just another piece of advice that fades from memory by next Tuesday. And I've given enough advice that faded. I want this one to stick. I want this one to actually change something for you. Your body right now, as you sit and watch this, is producing abnormal cells. I want you to really hear that, and I want you to not panic, because this is completely, entirely, universally normal. Every single human body, young, old, healthy, unhealthy, produces cells that malfunction, cells that divide incorrectly, cells that carry damaged DNA, cells that could, under the right conditions, eventually become cancerous. This is not a sign that something is wrong with you. This is just biology. This is what bodies do. Your immune system, when it is functioning the way it was designed to function, identifies and destroys the vast majority of those abnormal cells before they ever become a problem. This process has a name. It's called immune surveillance, and it is, without exaggeration, one of the most extraordinary defense systems in all of nature. Your body is running this process right now, in this moment, quietly and invisibly, destroying potential threats you will never know about, will never feel, will never have any awareness of whatsoever. It is happening constantly. It is the reason that the overwhelming majority of abnormal cells your body produces never become tumors. Now here is where everything changes. Here is the part I need you to really lean into, because this is the core of everything I'm going to tell you today. After the age of 50, and for some people it begins even earlier, closer to 45, this surveillance system begins to lose efficiency. It doesn't shut down, it doesn't fail catastrophically overnight, but it slows. The immune cells responsible for identifying and eliminating abnormal cells, particularly a type called natural killer cells, which I'll come back to in a moment, become less alert, less aggressive, less capable of doing the job they were built to do. The cellular environment inside your body shifts in ways that make it easier for those rogue cells to survive a little longer, to replicate a little more, to accumulate just enough mutations to begin behaving in ways that are genuinely dangerous. At the same time, chronic low-grade inflammation, which I'll explain in detail very shortly, tends to increase with age. And this inflammation creates a kind of biological fertilizer for cancer development. It doesn't cause cancer directly, but it creates the conditions in which cancer is far more likely to take hold and grow. And then there's the hormonal dimension. Insulin resistance, which becomes more common after 50, creates another layer of risk. Elevated insulin and insulin-like growth factor, IGF-1, are well-documented promoters of tumor growth, particularly in breast and colorectal cancers. So you have this triple threat: declining immune surveillance, increasing chronic inflammation, and rising insulin signaling. Three separate biological processes, all drifting in the wrong direction at roughly the same time, all converging to create a window of increased vulnerability that peaks somewhere between 55 and 70 years of age. And most people have no idea this is happening inside them because they feel fine. They're going to work, cooking dinner, watching their grandchildren, living their lives, completely unaware that the biological landscape inside them is quietly shifting. This is not a reason to panic. I want to be very clear about that. This is a reason to be informed, because here is what the research has shown us over and over again, with increasing clarity and confidence. These three processes, the immune decline, the inflammation, the insulin dysregulation, are not fixed. They are not set in stone. They are not something you simply have to accept because you turned 50 or 60 or 70. They are modifiable, meaningfully, measurably, clinically, significantly modifiable. And one of the most powerful tools we have for modifying all three of them simultaneously, not one at a time, not sequentially, but all three at once, is something so simple that most people genuinely cannot believe it works as well as it does. It is daily movement. Specifically, consistent, moderate intensity physical movement performed every single day for a minimum of 22 to 30 minutes. A brisk walk, a slow bicycle ride, swimming at a comfortable pace, movement that elevates your heart rate modestly, that makes you breathe a little harder than usual, but that you could sustain while holding a conversation. That is the zone. That is the sweet spot. Not intense, not exhausting, not something that requires a gym membership or special equipment or a personal trainer. Just consistent, daily, moderate movement. Now I know what some of you are thinking. You've heard that exercise is good for you since you were in school. This doesn't feel like a revelation, and I understand that completely. But what I want you to understand is that what I'm describing is not a general wellness message. It's a specific biological mechanism. A cascade of molecular events that happens inside your body every single time you move, and that has direct, measurable, documented effects on cancer risk. And once you understand the mechanism, once you see exactly what is happening at the cellular level, it stops being generic advice and becomes something entirely different. It becomes something you understand, and things you understand are things you actually do. So let me walk you through exactly what happens in your body when you take a 25-minute walk. Let's follow this from the moment you start moving to the changes that accumulate over days and weeks and months of doing this consistently. The moment your muscles begin to contract, within the first few minutes of movement, they begin producing and releasing a family of signaling proteins called myokines. These are molecules that your muscle tissue secretes specifically during physical activity, and they function as a kind of biochemical communication system between your muscles and the rest of your body, including your immune system. Myokines were only identified and named relatively recently. Serious research into them didn't really take off until the early 2000s. And what we've learned about them in the past 2 decades has genuinely changed how we understand the relationship between movement and health at a cellular level. One of the most important things myokines do is directly stimulate the activity of natural killer cells, the NK cells I mentioned earlier. These are the frontline soldiers of your anti-cancer immune defense. They're called natural killer cells because, unlike other immune cells that need to be specifically trained to recognize a particular pathogen or abnormal cell type, NK cells have a remarkable default ability to identify and destroy cells that look wrong. cells with damaged membranes, cells expressing unusual surface proteins, cells that are behaving in ways that healthy cells simply don't. They are, in a very real sense, your body's cancer patrol, and they operate around the clock, silently, in every tissue in your body. And myokines, the molecules your muscles release when you move, tell those NK cells to wake up, to increase their numbers, to become more aggressive, more mobile, more effective at doing their job. A landmark study published in the journal Cancer Research showed that participants who engaged in 30 minutes of brisk walking 5 days a week had measurably and significantly higher NK cell activity than sedentary individuals of the same age, not slightly higher. Significantly higher, the kind of difference that has real biological consequences, the kind of difference that means more abnormal cells being caught and destroyed before they have the chance to become something worse. And this isn't a one-time spike that fades the moment you stop walking. With consistent daily movement, the baseline activity level of your NK cells rises over time. You are not just getting a temporary boost, you are gradually recalibrating your immune surveillance system back toward where it was when you were younger. You are, through the simple act of daily movement, pushing back against one of the most dangerous biological processes that comes with aging. But the NK cell story is just the beginning. Let me tell you about what's happening with inflammation, because this is where it gets even more interesting, and honestly, even more urgent. Chronic low-grade inflammation is sometimes called the silent killer, and that phrase, as overused as it is genuinely accurate. Unlike the acute inflammation you feel when you sprain your ankle, which is localized, intentional, and self-resolving, chronic low-grade inflammation is diffuse, persistent, and largely invisible. You don't feel it. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up in any way that would make you go to a doctor and say something is wrong. But it is consistently present in the tissues, in the bloodstream, quietly degrading cellular function, accelerating DNA damage, and creating an internal environment where cancer is more likely to develop and more likely to progress once it does. The biological markers of chronic inflammation, molecules like interleukin-6, TNF-alpha, and C-reactive protein, are elevated in people who are sedentary, overweight, chronically stressed, or sleep-deprived. And they are elevated in people who are simply aging. As we get older, this baseline inflammatory state tends to creep upward in what researchers have actually given the name inflammaging, the chronic, low-grade, age-associated inflammatory state that contributes not just to cancer risk, but to heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, type 2 diabetes, and essentially every major chronic illness of aging. Daily moderate exercise is one of the most effective anti-inflammatory interventions we know of, and I want to emphasize the word moderate again, because this matters. Extreme exercise, the kind that pushes your body to exhaustion, can actually have the opposite effect and temporarily spike inflammatory markers. But moderate exercise, done consistently day after day, has a well-documented and compounding anti-inflammatory effect. It reduces circulating levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines. It increases levels of anti-inflammatory signaling molecules. And it does this in a way that no supplement, no medication, no dietary intervention alone can fully replicate. When I tell patients over 50 that their daily 25-minute walk is doing more to fight inflammation than most of the anti-inflammatory supplements they're spending money on every month, they look at me like I've said something outrageous. But it's true. It is documented, it is reproducible across populations and study designs, and it is completely free. Now let's talk about insulin, because this is the third piece of the puzzle, and it's the one that surprises people the most. Most people associate insulin with diabetes. They know it has something to do with blood sugar. They don't think of it as having anything to do with cancer. But the connection between insulin signaling and cancer development is one of the most robustly established relationships in all of oncology research, and it remains wildly underappreciated by the general public. Here is the basic biology. Insulin and its close relative insulin-like growth factor 1, or IGF-1, are essentially growth signals. When they're present in your bloodstream, they tell cells to grow, to divide, to replicate. This is normal and necessary. Your body needs this signaling to function. The problem arises when these signals are chronically elevated, as they are in people with insulin resistance, which becomes increasingly common after 50, particularly in people who are sedentary and who carry excess weight around the abdomen. Chronically elevated insulin doesn't just tell normal, healthy cells to grow. It tells abnormal cells to grow too. It creates a systemic environment that is, in the language of oncology, pro-tumorigenic. It promotes the survival and proliferation of cells that your immune system would otherwise identify and destroy. And the evidence linking high insulin and IGF-1 levels to increased risk of breast, colorectal, prostate, and endometrial cancers is extensive, consistent, and impossible to ignore. Daily moderate exercise is one of the most powerful tools we have for improving insulin sensitivity and lowering circulating insulin levels. When your muscles contract during movement, they take up glucose from the bloodstream through a mechanism that doesn't even require insulin. They essentially bypass the normal pathway and create an insulin-independent route for glucose disposal. Over time, with consistent exercise, your cells become more responsive to insulin, your pancreas needs to produce less of it, and your baseline circulating levels drop. You are, through movement, literally removing one of the major biological drivers of cancer development from your internal environment. Day by day, walk by walk. There is one more mechanism I want to cover before I bring all of this together, and it's one that most people have never heard discussed in the context of cancer prevention. It involves your gut microbiome, and I think it might be the piece of this puzzle that surprises people the most. Your gut is home to trillions of microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, viruses, and other microscopic life that collectively form an ecosystem of breathtaking complexity and importance. And this ecosystem does far more than help you digest food. It plays a direct and documented role in regulating your immune function. It produces metabolites, short-chain fatty acids in particular, that protect the lining of your colon and reduce the risk of colorectal cancer. It metabolizes potential carcinogens that enter your digestive tract. It communicates with your brain, your endocrine system, and your immune cells in ways we are only beginning to fully understand. The diversity of your gut microbiome, how many different species are present, and how evenly they're distributed, is one of the strongest predictors of immune resilience and gut health that we have. And study after study has now confirmed something remarkable. Regular physical activity is one of the most reliable and powerful promoters of gut microbial diversity in existence. People who exercise regularly have measurably more diverse microbiomes than sedentary people of the same age, eating the same diet. And this difference has real documented consequences for cancer risk, particularly colorectal cancer, which remains one of the most common and most preventable cancers in the world. When you take a walk every day, you are not just burning calories. You are not just doing something good for your heart. You are cultivating a richer, more diverse, more resilient microbial community in your gut, one that is better equipped to protect your colon, to regulate your immune responses, and to metabolize and neutralize the kind of cellular threats that, left unchecked, can eventually become cancer. That is happening every single day, every single walk. So let me bring all of this together now, because I want you to see it as one coherent, connected picture. After 50, your body experiences 3 converging biological shifts that increase cancer vulnerability, declining immune surveillance, rising chronic inflammation, and worsening insulin signaling. Daily moderate movement, 25 to 30 minutes every day at a comfortable but slightly elevated pace, simultaneously addresses all 3. It boosts NK cell activity and restores immune surveillance. It reduces chronic inflammation through its effects on cytokine profiles and anti-inflammatory signaling. It improves insulin sensitivity and lowers circulating insulin and IGF-1, and it diversifies your gut microbiome, adding yet another layer of protection. No drug does all 4 of those things at once. No supplement does all 4 of those things at once. Nothing in our pharmacological toolkit, and I work in a field with some of the most powerful pharmacology in all of medicine, comes close to the breadth and depth of protective effects that consistent daily movement provides. And I say that not as someone dismissing medicine. I say that as someone who has dedicated their career to medicine. I say it because it's true, and because you deserve to know it. The research suggests that people who maintain consistent moderate exercise habits after 50 have somewhere between a 30 and 50% lower risk of developing the most common cancers compared to sedentary individuals of the same age. That range varies by cancer type and by study design, but across dozens of large, well-constructed studies spanning multiple decades and multiple countries, that signal is remarkably consistent. 30 to 50%. Think about what that means in practical terms. Think about the difference between a coin flip and odds that are meaningfully, significantly tilted in your favor. That is what we are talking about. That is the magnitude of the effect. Now, I want to speak directly to something that comes up every single time I have this conversation, because I know it's coming up for some of you right now. Some of you are thinking, I'm not athletic. I've never exercised consistently in my life. My knees hurt. My back aches. I have a chronic condition that makes intense activity impossible. And I want to be absolutely clear. I am not asking you to become an athlete. I am not asking you to run or train or push through pain or do anything that feels like punishment. I am asking you to walk, to move your body at a pace that feels manageable for you for 25 to 30 minutes every day. That is it. That is the whole prescription. If you can only manage 15 minutes right now, start with 15 minutes. If you need to break it into 2 sessions, do 2 sessions. If the only place you can walk is around your home or your apartment, then walk around your home. The biology doesn't care about the scenery. It responds to movement. It responds to muscle contraction. It responds to elevated heart rate. Wherever you can provide those things, your body will respond. I have had patients in their late 70s, patients with severe arthritis, patients recovering from surgeries, patients living with chronic pain, who have built this habit and held it and experienced real measurable benefits, not because they became athletes, because they became consistent, because they decided that 25 minutes of movement every day was non-negotiable as eating, as non-negotiable as sleeping, as non-negotiable as anything else that keeps them alive and functioning. Consistency, not intensity. That is the message. That is the thing I wish I could have said to every patient who ever sat across from me before things went wrong. Not push yourself harder, not do more, but do it every day. Make it a permanent feature of your life, not a phase, not a January resolution, not something you do for 3 weeks and then abandon. Every day, for the rest of your life, because every day that you do it, your immune system is sharper, your inflammation is lower, your insulin is more controlled, your gut is more resilient. Every day is a day your body is better equipped to catch and destroy something that could otherwise have become something devastating. I want to close with something personal because I think it matters and I think you deserve to hear it. A few years ago, a woman came to see me, 62 years old, retired school teacher, came in for a checkup because her daughter had been pushing her for months to finally get one. She felt perfectly fine, no symptoms, no warning signs, nothing that would have sent her to a doctor on her own. But during that checkup, we found something, a very early stage colorectal tumor, small, contained, completely operable. She went through surgery, recovered beautifully, and today, by every clinical measure, she is cancer-free. She is well, she is living her life. And when I saw her at her follow-up appointment 6 months after the surgery, she sat down across from me and she asked, "What can I do to make sure this never comes back?" And I told her exactly what I've told you today. I told her about immune surveillance, about NK cells, about myokines, about inflammation, about insulin, about the microbiome. I gave her the full picture, the way I've given it to you today. And she listened to everything, and then she was quiet for a moment, and then she looked at me and said, "Why didn't anyone tell me this before?" I didn't have a good answer, and honestly, I still don't, but I am trying, in whatever way I can, to make sure that question gets asked less often. That is why I make these videos. That is why I'm here talking to you right now. You have more control over this than the medical system has led you to believe. Your body wants to protect you. It is trying to protect you in this very moment. What daily movement does is give it the resources, the signaling, the biological conditions it needs to do that job better, more completely, more effectively for longer. It is the simplest thing I can ask of you, and the evidence says it is also one of the most powerful things you can do. So when this video ends, I want you to do just one thing. Put on your shoes, go outside, or go to wherever you can move, and walk for 25 minutes, not tomorrow, not after the weekend, not when things slow down at work, today. Because your immune system is ready to work harder for you. It just needs you to give it the chance. And if this video gave you something, if something I said today clicked, if you're going to take that walk, if you're going to share this with someone you love who needs to hear it, then please take 2 seconds right now and hit the like button. It is the simplest way to tell me this kind of content matters to you, and it helps this information reach the people who need it most. And if you want to keep getting this kind of honest, science-based health information, the kind that doesn't get talked about enough in the places it should, then subscribe to this channel. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video, because I have a lot more to share with you. And I promise, I will always give you the full picture. Take that walk today. I'll see you in the next video.